Banks have come through the worst of the credit crunch. That's the interpretation being placed on the latest figures from the banking sector. Barclays has announced profits of more than £1.3 billion for the first 3 months of this year. And the US government is tonight announcing steps to help banks cope with the rest of the recession. Our business editor, Robert Peston, has this report.
Mark the date, May the 7th, 2009, because today may well be the day that we can start to relax a bit and be confident that our biggest banks are on the road to recovery, that the risk of more of them going belly up has diminished very considerably. We've heard from two big British banks. One, Barclays, is growing profits again very sharply, and the other, Lloyds, confirmed that it has more than enough capital to absorb the losses it expects to make this year. A former chairman of Citigroup, Sir Win Bischoff, a banker for 45 years, is cautiously optimistic.
Do you think that for the world's biggest banks that we're over the worst?
Do you know, I think as far as the banks are concerned, we are probably over the worst. We have thought that, of course, a number of times, but I think my stomach now tells me that we probably are over the worst.
But banking is global. And tonight, the US government is taking steps to ensure that America's 19 biggest banks have enough capital to cope with the economic contraction. Just as safety specialists check that cars can withstand the worst crashes, the US authorities have been checking the strength of banks to make sure they have enough capital as a buffer against losses on loans going bad. They've given a clean bill of health to a tiny number and insisted that some, such as Citigroup and Bank of America, reinforce themselves by raising tens of billions of dollars, which should be quite a cushion or airbag for whatever shocks hit them. The chairman of the US Federal Reserve today lamented how little capital the banks had been carrying.
Whether it would have avoided the current crisis, I don't know. But I think it would have been of some assistance since the firms would have come into this period with a bigger buffer and more ability to withstand the losses that they've taken.
We've had 20 months of lurching from banking crisis to banking crisis.
Tonight at 10, Northern Rock appeals for calm and urges its customers not to panic.
Tonight at 10, a day of turmoil on the world's financial markets. Shares plummet after the collapse of one of America's biggest investment banks. Thousands of jobs at Lehman Brothers are in jeopardy in the United States and here in Britain. It's all change for the British banking system. £37 billion is the price for rescuing some of our biggest high street banks.
But just possibly we're at last through the initial phase of this extraordinary global economic shock, the phase that was all about the seizing up of financial markets, the contraction of the banking system, the collapse of individual banks. Which means that today, May the 7th, 2009, there's one less thing to worry about, though we are still dealing with the consequence of the unprecedented financial trauma, a global recession.
And Robert's with me now. Robert, what are we hearing from Washington today?
Well, literally within the last few minutes, we've had the results of those safety checks on the 19 biggest US banks that I referred to in my piece. And it seems to me to be pretty good news. The US authorities simulated loan losses that would have been greater than the kind of losses the banks suffered in the Great Depression to evaluate, the maximum amount of capital they might need if everything went belly up in a way that we don't really expect. And the sum of money they say the banks need to raise in the form of new capital is $75 billion, which I have to say is rather less than people were expecting. And most importantly of all, the bank people were most worried about, Citigroup, actually only needs to find about another $5 billion. Now, to you and me, that's a large sum of money, but in the context of what was the world's biggest bank, that is not a colossal sum. So, in a sense, to reinforce the point I was making in that piece, there is a lot of evidence around tonight that for the banking system of the US, of the UK, perhaps for the world, we may now be over the worst.
Robert, thank you very much. Robert Peston there, our business editor. And as we've heard, despite the world's banks showing signs of some recovery, as Robert was saying, the recession is still taking its toll. Today, the